the White House heats up.
Winning means uniting America, not sowing more division and hatred and anger.
I have zero doubt in my mind that together we are the campaign that can beat Trump.
Democrats going all out to win delegates, seeking the party's presidential nomination.
President Trump already has his party's nomination, and true to form, is not holding back.
Crazy Bernie's gonna go crazy. For Sleepy Joe, he doesn't even know where he is, what he's doing.
Now on King 5, we expect to see the first results from the Washington state presidential primary.
Who will claim victory as the two leading candidates slug it out, state by state?
To beat Trump, we need the largest voter turnout in the history of the United States of America.
This is not an election just for the soul of the Democratic Party. It's a battle for America's soul.
This is a King 5 special presentation, Decision 2020, the Washington state presidential primary.
And good evening. Ballots have been cast and ballot drop boxes closed just moments ago all across the state. Good evening on this primary election night. I'm Joyce Taylor.
And I'm Mark Wright. Thank you so much for being here. So counties all over the state are busy right now counting the votes as the Democratic candidates pursue their party's nomination. And President Trump seeks re-election. We have a lot on the way for you right here for the next hour.
So we have your very first look at results right here in Washington state. Live exclusive interviews from the Democratic and Republican state chairs. And our King 5 News analysts will be helping us go beyond the ballot tonight. First, let's take a look at some of the results from some of the other states. NBC is calling Joe Biden the winner in Michigan, the big prize tonight in the race for Democratic delegates. There are 125 delegates at stake. And as you can see, the vote tallies in Michigan, Joe Biden leading with 54% of the vote.
And a similar outcome here, at least for now. The former vice president has been declared the winner in Missouri. As you can see, soundly beating Bernie Sanders. 68 pledged delegates are up for grabs in that state.
Biden's also won the primary today in Mississippi. This adds to his strong showing in the South during Super Tuesday just a week ago. There are 36 pledged delegates in the state of Mississippi.
Right now, North Dakota Democrats in the caucuses are showing Bernie Sanders with a lead right now. 14 pledged delegates on the line in that state tonight.
A Democratic candidate needs 1,991 pledged delegates to win the party's nomination. So, where do the candidates stand right now? Well, Joe Biden's delegate lead has increased. He leads by well over 100 delegates at this point.
We're regenerating a Democratic base, the Democratic Party, the African American community, high school educated folks like the ones I grew up with in Claymont, not far from here. In my old neighborhood, labor, suburban women, veterans, firefighters, union members, and so many more. People of every economic station. The poor who are struggling, and they are struggling in this environment. The middle class who worries about whether or not they're going to be able to hang on and stay there, maintain their economic security. They're the reason Jill and I got involved in this campaign in the first place. And they're the reason why I became a Democrat so long ago.
Joe Biden, along with his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, speaking just moments ago in Philadelphia tonight. So as we wait for the vote results in our state, we want to check in now with the King 5 political analysts to get their perspective.
King 5's Chris Daniels is in our newsroom with Scott McClellan and Ron Sims. So, Chris, it's going to be a very busy night, one that's not turning out the way Sanders supporters had hoped.
No, not in Washington state and not across the country. Welcome to our King 5 News election desk, where we are expecting those numbers to come in from Washington state and the Secretary of State's office at any minute. We do know that more than 1 million ballots were filed statewide for the Democrats. And we now have, in my ear, they tell me, results out of King County, where we know that 450,000 ballots were going to be counted today. And you can see the numbers on your screen. Again, King County numbers only. The people who filled out and checked the box as Democrats, Bernie Sanders with a slight lead, ever so slight, at 33.6% over Joe Biden at 32.5%. Remember, Elizabeth Warren dropped out after these ballots were mailed out, along with Michael Bloomberg, and you can see they registered in the Washington state primary among Democrats, 15.2% for Warren, Michael Bloomberg at just under 9%. Again, this is the King County numbers only. we are expecting many more numbers to pour in from across the state. So there you have it. Ron Sims and Scott McClellan, our first numbers from Washington State. We'll continue to talk about those as the numbers pour in here throughout the course of the hour. We have been talking, though, as well about what we've seen on a national level and a lot of focus on Michigan tonight. What's your initial take on this primary evening?
Well, this is another big night for Joe Biden, just like it was on Super Tuesday and following on South Carolina. You hear what Joe Biden was just saying when he was speaking. He's trying to reach out to Sanders supporters now. Sanders' campaign has said he's not going to be speaking tonight. That is very telling that he is not going to come out and speak tonight. That tells me that he's going in talking to his advisors and going to be talking to his advisors more about what is the next step for his campaign. Is there a path forward, and why would you continue if there's not? A big win in Michigan for Joe Biden that set the tone for the night. We'll see how Washington turns out. Right now it looks pretty close in the early numbers. A lot of that appears probably as some of the early vote because you have Warren and Bloomberg getting a significant chunk there. And as these voters who voted later after Super Tuesday, as those votes come in, let's see where things end up.
Ron, you're a former, as many people know, 3-term King County executive. You know King County well. Those are King County numbers. What's your take on just that margin in King County being so small?
I was surprised, actually, it was that small. That's a pretty, in King County, you would expect people to move more to the candidate that we call the most liberal of them all. And in this case, you saw some pragmatism. So you see a really tight race between Sanders and Biden. That is pleasing, and I'm not surprised. King County has people who are boomers, people who are the millennials, and a really good mix. People who have strong passions and feelings. So I didn't expect it to be one candidate over the other. I thought it was going to be fairly close, and we're seeing it is fairly close.
And one thing that, we just went through the numbers in Mississippi and Michigan and Missouri, all have been called for Joe Biden. As you continue to look at the King County numbers on the Washington Democratic side, in Mississippi, there is a question at this hour if Bernie Sanders will meet the 15% threshold. Otherwise, that could be an all or nothing situation for Joe Biden in terms of getting all of the delegates out of Mississippi. He's performing extremely well once again with African American voters. Roughly 85% of the ballots that have been counted down in Mississippi from African American voters going towards Joe Biden. Almost 2-to-1 margin in Michigan amongst early returns. So that is going to be something that we'll continue to watch as we continue to get these ballot numbers in. Any final thoughts as we talk about the Washington State numbers?
Well, I think that the polling just last Friday showed that it was neck and neck, and the big question was, where are those Warren supporters going to go? And what you saw in Michigan tonight, it looks like from exit polling that some of those more of those Warren supporters are going to Joe Biden. The party seems to be coalescing. Let's see if that's the case here in Washington State. I think these early numbers, as Ron was saying, do send an indication that it might be a good night for Joe Biden even here in Washington State.
Joyce, Mark?
One quick question. Is it also not a good night for President Trump because there's so many returns, more than 600,000 people casting their ballots for President Trump, a lot of Republicans voting, correct?
Ron?
Yeah, one would expect that in a state like this, and there are a number of Republicans, and I am not surprised that there were 600,000 votes cast for Donald Trump.
Well, and one thing to point out to Joyce's question, at least as of yesterday with the Secretary of State's office, the numbers were trending heavily on the Democratic side in terms of, this question of whether you fill out the Democratic or Republican box. A majority of the ballots, it was about 2-to-1 statewide, were Democratic. In King County, that number was pushing almost 80% on the Democratic side. So that is going to be one of the things that we parse out.
This is a Democratic state. If you look at the legislature, both houses, House and Senate, governor, all the offices except for one, are controlled by Democrats. That is not going to change because of this election.
More to come throughout the hour. Back to you.
All right. Thank you. So a lot of people have voted, of course, in the state. As you heard, the number of returned ballots will be higher than the primary 4 years ago.
So the coronavirus doesn't appear to be having an impact because our state votes entirely by mail. Chris was talking about the Secretary of State, Kim Wyman. Here's what she told us about turnout this time around.
We had about 1.6 million people who've already returned a ballot, which is really exciting. We've already surpassed the 2016 number, so we're looking at record-breaking turnout.
Get to Pierce and Snohomish.
All right, we just got some new statewide numbers on the Democratic side, and right now it is neck and neck with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden with 33% of the vote, Elizabeth Warren with 13%, and Michael Bloomberg, of course, those two not in the race, down in the single digits there.
And we'll keep tracking the numbers. So there has been a lot of activity at the King County Elections headquarters.
King 5's Natalie Swaby joins us live from Renton tonight. So Natalie, what's the story there?
Yeah, King County Elections telling me that they've seen record-breaking turnout. They say that they've got about 40% voter turnout. Now, just at about 8 o'clock, they closed these doors, but a little while earlier, we were here and we have video to show you what it looked like. People arriving here to drop off their ballots today. And in another part of the building where they were processing ballots, workers were required to wear gloves because of coronavirus concerns. Ballots are being carefully checked. One thing workers are looking for, voters must mark Democrat or Republican on their ballot. So far, about 24,000 people have failed to do that. King County Elections will be contacting those people because if that's not included on the ballot, it is not valid. Now tonight, a few voters talked with us about their decision.
I decided to vote for Bernie. Student loans are a big issue, and so I'm hoping to get some change seen with that, and I don't know. We'll see.
I just think that we can probably get a little bit of back to normal with Joe Biden compared to things the way they are now.
Joe Biden, I think he's going to win. And I was a Kamala Harris guy, but she just didn't get any traction. So Joe was probably my second or third pick from the beginning. But yeah, I'm okay with Joe.
Just what some of the voters had to say tonight. Now, King County Elections says they'll be able to tally about half of the ballots by tonight, and the majority of the ballots will be counted by Friday. Live in Renton, Natalie Swaby, King 5 News.
Natalie, thanks so much. So we're also keeping tabs on what's happening in Eastern Washington.
Reporter Tim Pham is live at the Spokane County Elections Office tonight. So Tim, we're hearing that some voters there, like here, missed an important step in getting their votes counted. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, Mark, about 5% of the votes they received were told they were not filled out properly, and those votes were rejected. Like this sample ballot here you see, or envelope rather, you can see that they either didn't circle a party or they didn't sign the oath, and we're told that those ballots were rejected, and then they're going to be sent letters telling them that they have one more chance if they want their primary vote to count to get that in before a certain date. So this year is very different, and some Washingtonians might not be used to this process because both parties' primaries are listed on the same ballot in Washington, but you could only pick one or the other to vote in, and you had to sign a statement on the envelope promising you didn't vote in both. So again, this is a new process, and election officials know that there's going to be a learning curve. So if your ballot was rejected, you'll get a second chance. A letter will be sent to you if your ballot was incomplete, giving you one more opportunity to correct that mistake. You also might have noticed that on the ballot, there are many candidates on the Democratic side that have since dropped out. So you might be wondering what happens if you chose one of them. Well, election officials say the ballots were printed 2 months ago, and it's up to the party to decide what happens to those results.
There are names on the ballot that have since dropped out, and it will be up to the Democratic Party to decide what to do with those votes. But we will count every vote as marked for each one of those candidates and report that to the Democratic Party.
So far, thousands of letters have been sent out to voters letting them know that their ballot was rejected. If you receive one of those letters, you have to get that back to your election office by March 19th. That's because the state certifies election results on March 20th. Reporting live in Spokane County, I'm Tim Pham, King 5 News.
Tim, thanks so much, and we'll check back with you. Well, Bernie Sanders won this state's Democratic caucuses 4 years ago.
But this year, ballots cast in the primary election determine who gets the delegates, not those caucuses, those little neighborhood meetings. So how are Sanders supporters reacting to the results tonight? King 5 Sebastian Robertson, live where Sanders supporters are watching the results come in. Sebastian, good evening.
Good evening. That margin's still very close. We're talking about 4,000 votes. That's new information as of just a couple minutes ago. By no means is that race over here in Washington State as we see where those delegates are going to go. First and foremost, maybe the elephant in the room. Anytime you're talking politics in Seattle, especially Sanders, you expect to see a packed crowd. This is a candidate that's brought out hundreds of thousands of people here in the Northwest, but if you notice, you'd be hard-pressed to find maybe 12 people here. That has less to do with politics and more so what we've been talking about the past couple of weeks, which is the coronavirus. Many people heeding the advice of politicians, staying home. Just about all the major candidates, all the major parties have canceled any form of formal watch party. This is by no means a formal watch party. It is, though, organized by Sean Scott, who recently was appointed to head Sanders' campaign here in Washington.
Absolutely.
I imagine there's a little bit of nerves in the air. How are you feeling as we're just sort of starting to get these King County results?
Right. Well, I'm Bernie Sanders is a Washington State field director here in Washington State, and I know, my partner Karen Chase, who's our Washington State director, and all of our volunteers, our supporters, endorsers across the state, are looking with great anticipation to see the results of all the hard work, the grassroots effort that we've been putting in to make sure that we see transformative change in the White House this November.
This was a big night. This is a big night for Sanders and Biden. Do you feel that all this attention on the coronavirus has detracted from the message or made it harder for you to get that final push?
Well, I think one of the things that I've heard from our volunteers and things that I've heard at the doors myself is that this really highlights the need for a real competent leadership on big questions like Medicare for all. There's no reason why in the middle of a global health pandemic, what started as an epidemic and has spread to metropolitan areas like Seattle, people should be going for want of health coverage, of health care. And so if anything, I think that while it has presented some complications with respect to gatherings that people are having across the county, it has really highlighted the need for leadership on an issue that is socialized medicine that Senator Sanders has been talking about for at least 4 decades in this country.
Sean Scott with the Sanders campaign. This race still very close to call, at least here locally, let alone in Washington State. That's the latest here on Capitol Hill with the Sanders campaign. Back to you.
All right, Sebastian, thank you. Well, the state Democratic Party chair is going to be joining us live next with her take on tonight's results so far.
As we head to break, let's check out some of the results from our exclusive statewide King 5 News poll. First up, how would Joe Biden fare if he is the Democratic presidential nominee running against President Trump? According to our exclusive poll from Survey USA Today, Survey USA, Biden would get 57%, Trump 34% of the vote. Bernie Sanders also leads in a hypothetical head-to-head matchup by about the same margin. In our poll, Sanders received 56% to President Trump's 35%.
The results are much closer from respondents in eastern Washington. As you can see here, Biden getting 46% and Trump 45%. That is a statistical dead heat. The margin also much closer in the Sanders-Trump matchup. Among people in eastern Washington, they are both tied at 46%, also a dead heat. We will be right back with more of our election coverage on this primary election Super Tuesday 2. Welcome back to our special Decision 2020 coverage, and new numbers now from Washington State. As you can see, very, very close, with about 34% of the vote in here in Washington. Bernie Sanders with 32.7%, Joe Biden with 32.6%. Of course, we will not have final results potentially for weeks because these are the votes that are in, but a lot of you are mailing them today. So at this point, it's a dead heat.
It is super tight. All right, the Republican side now. The president, of course, running unopposed on the Republican side of the ballot. He is expected to get all of Washington State's 44 pledged delegates. We will talk with the Washington State Republican Party Chair Caleb Heimlich coming up in our second half hour. But first, Tina Podlodowski joins us. She is the Washington State Democratic Party Chair. Tina, it's great to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you. Really good to see you. Kind of exciting times with these primaries that we've been having. So let's talk first about the results. Not what Sanders supporters had been hoping. Biden's camp obviously really happy about this. How do you think this happened this way tonight? How do you explain it?
Well, I think it's a good night for Democrats. And think of all the great Democratic ideals and Democratic voters that you have out there. You have a difference between, as of 5 p.m. reporting, 1.3 million Democrats voting in the primary versus 500,000 Republicans. So think about what that means for our primary in August and ultimately for November in Washington State. I think what it means is people are divided on who they want to have carry out the ideals of the Democratic Party. We have terrific, terrific candidates. I think we all want to get to the same destination of unity and things like health care for everyone, income inequality, fixing our justice system. We might have some differences on how we get there, but the destination is the same, and Democrats will be there in November.
Tina, electability is a term that's been thrown around a lot on the Democratic side. Bernie Sanders has flat out said the Democratic establishment is terrified of his success. Do you think Americans are ready to elect a self-proclaimed socialist if he's running against President Trump?
I think Democrats are ready to elect whoever will be our standard bearer and make sure that they beat Donald Trump. For us, this is an election about making change for a country that has suffered under 3.5 years almost of Donald Trump and will continue to suffer until Election Day, November, and we get Donald Trump and his cronies out of office. So for us, it's also not just about Trump. It's about winning back the Senate. It's about making sure we keep the House, and it's winning up and down the ticket throughout the state of Washington.
Let's talk about Biden versus Sanders. Let's hypothetically say Biden wins the nomination. How does the Biden camp get Sanders supporters in the tent? How do they unify the party? Because it's split right now. And do Biden supporters understand what Sanders people really want?
I think that's two things need to happen. Number one is, just like with Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg, those candidates bring their supporters along. So they need to be there and they need to be visible. We need to have a ticket that, indeed, if it's a Biden nomination, that Bernie Sanders is there. He's bringing his supporters along, and all of those ideas that have been part of the Sanders campaign need to be included in what we do together. But the best way to think about it, I think, is team of rivals, right? Go back to Lincoln, go back to that great book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, one of my favorites, and think about you've got a great team of rivals. And if you looked on that Democratic debate stage when we had 10 folks up on that stage, boy, that's an incredible group of people to be president, vice president, cabinet secretaries, and making this country a better place.
Tina, 4 years ago, Sanders beat Hillary Clinton in both Michigan and Washington. Why do you think Joe Biden is doing better than Clinton against Sanders?
Well, keep in mind, in 2016 in Washington, we had a caucus. And so we had about 230,000 people participate in that caucus. That was a record at the time for a caucus in Washington state. We made the move to a primary, and we're going to go past 2 million people voting in Washington state. So I think you're hearing the diversity, the big tent of the Democratic Party here, speaking out, speaking loudly, and using their vote as their voice.
The Trump base, the president's support in Washington's, I think, unlike something we haven't seen in this country in a generation, at least. So how does the Democratic Party go up against a president, an incumbent president, where the economy has been good, jobs have been good, unemployment's been down, and his campaign style is unique?
Well, I think Donald Trump is something that we've never seen in our country for a long time, and so many people have suffered because of it. Look, if you look at what's happened to the average working person, their life has not gotten better under Donald Trump. That's really, really clear. If you look to see what's happening in our own state right now and the cuts to the CDC and how that's a part of the coronavirus epidemic, and more will come out over the coming days as to how poorly that administration has done. It goes on and on and on. I think we have folks who are done with Donald Trump and all his allies and cronies, parties, and you're going to see Democrats carry the day.
Okay.
Caleb Heimlich with the Republican Party here in the state. I'm sure he's going to have a different point of view.
He just might.
Yeah. He's coming that up. In our next half hour, we're definitely going to hear from him and his take on all of this too. But Tina Podladowski, thank you so much. We really appreciate being here.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got a lot more election results coming in. Turnout has been brisk. That's an understatement. It could be days, though, before all these ballots are counted because so many of us vote, well, we all vote in the mail. So stay with us. We'll be right back. There are some election workers working hard as we speak. We'll be right back.
Thank you. Okay.
Welcome back to our special election coverage decision 2020. You're watching King 5 News, and here are the latest results from the state of Washington. It is a razor-thin margin right now between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. 1,587 votes separate the two candidates right now, with about 32%, 34% of the overall vote having been counted so far. So it is a very close race between these two candidates on the Democratic side. So on this election night, we continue to monitor the latest developments on the coronavirus outbreak.
King 5's Jessica Jenner Castro is in the newsroom with the latest on this. Jessica.
Joyce and Mark, today we learned Governor Jay Inslee will make an announcement tomorrow morning on a new plan to contain coronavirus in Washington state. And this just in, we can confirm, a source close to the discussion says the governor will announce a ban on events of 250 people or more. And this ban will center around sporting events, concert parades. And we're told public health will address schools and workplaces at that press conference. The governor will be joined by county executives of King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties, as well as the mayors of Seattle, Everett, and Tacoma. The conference happens at 10:15 tomorrow morning. And I want to show you a look at the latest numbers on your screen here. There have been at least 267 cases of coronavirus in Washington state. 24 of those have died, the majority of them in King County. The state says 2,175 people have tested negative for coronavirus so far. Today, a cleaning crew arrived at the Life Care Center in Kirkland, the nursing home at the center of the outbreak. We got an update from Life Care this afternoon, who say 64 of its 180 employees have shown symptoms and are no longer working. Approximately 30 have been tested so far. 21 residents still on site have tested positive. Some officials are putting Seattle in the same category as Wuhan and Northern Italy. A university in St. Louis banning any student who comes to King County over spring break from returning to campus for at least 2 weeks. And of course, we have the very latest for you on the coronavirus outbreak here in Western Washington on our website, king5.com, as well as on our King 5 app. Mark?
Thank you for that update. Let's take a look now at the overall delegate count right now. Joe Biden so far has secured 809 delegates. It takes about 1,990 delegates to secure the nomination, so we still have a long way to go. Bernie Sanders right now with 654 delegates.
Let's take a look now at results from several counties. We have about 36 of 39 counties reporting at this point. So first to Snohomish County, and you can see the results here. 34% for Joe Biden, 32% for Bernie Sanders.
Now to Pierce County. Let's take a look at those results. An overwhelming lead for Joe Biden there, at least with the initial dump of ballots. Joe Biden was 66%. Interestingly, candidates no longer in the race. Michael Bloomberg with 22% and Pete Buttigieg with 10% of the vote there in Pierce County.
Let's move on to Clark County now. This is in southwestern Washington. The ballot count showing, again, a good lead for Joe Biden with Bernie Sanders at 32%. So still pretty close there. 12% going to Mayor Bloomberg. We will keep tracking all of the numbers, the latest results as they come in from today's presidential primary.
We'll be right back after a short break.
That's the meeting.
And welcome back to Decision 2020, our special coverage on this primary election Tuesday. The votes have been cast, the ballots are being counted, and here's a look at who is leading among Democrats seeking the party nomination. Right now, Bernie Sanders with 32.7% here in Washington, Joe Biden 32.5%. With the error, a margin of error, that's pretty much a dead heat in Washington.
Super close race there. Of course, President Trump, running unopposed on the Republican side right now, has 99% of the vote secured for his nomination in terms of delegates from the state of Washington. Well, the big story tonight, former Vice President Joe Biden has been racking up victory after victory tonight, Michigan, Missouri, and Mississippi.
And the numbers, of course, not looking as good for Bernie Sanders, not at all what his camp had hoped for. King 5's Chris Daniels is in the newsroom with more on what is happening tonight with the Sanders campaign. Chris.
Joyce and Mark, it looked like our King 5 statewide poll of voters was pretty much on the money. We told you in advance it'd be a dead heat. It looks like a dead heat right now between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders with that fraction of a percentage difference. One thing that stands out as we turn to Ron and Scott, Pierce County went heavily for Joe Biden. I mean, there was a lot of talk about Bernie Sanders having a lead in this state. It's pretty close in King County, but Pierce County, went heavily towards Biden. And you and I have talked before about the demographics of this region and how it is different outside Seattle.
The Pierce County has a different job base, not high tech as much. It has a large marine industry, fishing industry, forest industries, and it's also a commuter community as well, who go up to Seattle to work and go back down to Pierce County, both because they have opportunities to buy homes, but there is a different cultural society and feel in Pierce County, and it's so we're not seeing anything that should surprise us. Pierce County is always been and always will be a little bit more conservative than King County.
When you've seen the breakdown by congressional district, by county, anything jump out to you, Scott?
Well, I think hearing from some of the exit polling that's been going on in Washington State today, 2/3 of voters are saying that they're liberal. That's higher than many other states where Democratic primaries are occurring, not surprising. But then at the same time, more than 60% of those exit polls say that they think Biden has the best chance to win in November. So I think that's a reflection of a national trend and a narrative that Joe Biden is the one that can take out Donald Trump in the view of Democrats. And so Democrats have rallied around him. And when you look ahead after today, next week does not look promising for Bernie Sanders. And I think that's why you're seeing that he is not coming out to speak tonight. He is going to hold off on that and probably reevaluating where he goes from here, because the math does not look like it's there. But it'll be interesting to see the final breakdown in Washington State. The King 5 poll showed very closely what is happening right now, that it's neck and neck. And if Biden wins Washington State, that's a very good night for Joe Biden. It's a big night for him anyway, nationally, but it's a very good night for him if he were to win Washington State. It's still a good night if he's close.
Yeah, let's talk more about the King 5 poll and the survey of voters statewide. One of the things you just mentioned, Scott, when people were asked if they had to vote for president, no matter who the candidate would be, if it was Joe Biden in particular, it was significantly in favor of Joe Biden in terms of what the vote totals would be head to head with Donald Trump, more than Bernie Sanders. And I think this is another question that also kind of jumps out. Did the self-proclaimed title of Democratic Socialist hurt Bernie Sanders? And you see what Washington voters have to say as part of the King 5 News poll. 30% said yes, it's a major factor for them. Another third said it's not a factor. Ron, what do you think?
I think it was a big factor, actually. When you're looking at the candidates, you were saying which one can best beat the president. And I think the worry among a lot of Democrats, whether you were liberal or conservative, was that Biden offered a far more difficult challenge for Donald Trump than Bernie would, because all you got to say is he's a socialist. He's a socialist. And people have mixed emotions about that. And so I think that socialism was a much bigger factor than people are willing to admit.
From a strategy standpoint, having worked on so many campaigns on the Republican side, kind of put us in those shoes. There's been a lot of talk about whether Donald Trump really wanted Bernie Sanders, or wants Bernie Sanders, I should say, as the nominee, because it would be perhaps an easier matchup for him. From a strategy standpoint, is that the case? I mean, do you look at it that way?
Yeah, I think every campaign says, it doesn't matter who the opponent is going to be in the end during the primary season. But no, I think that Donald Trump would have preferred, in his campaign, would have preferred Bernie Sanders to be the nominee, because they could have drawn that big contrast. The country as a whole is not to the left. It is somewhere in the center left to center right spectrum when you look at the country. And I think that's why Joe Biden has been able to bring voters in the Democratic primary to his side after winning in South Carolina. And we're seeing that play out all across the country tonight in the states that are voting.
And there you see, once again, the margin between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Keep in mind, people had to check the box on their ballot. There were multiple names on the ballot, but that is matching up with our Survey USA poll statewide of voters. And you see the top two at this hour. Again, the number I was trying to cite earlier, Joe Biden head-to-head amongst those voters, 52% said regardless of who they want to win, who they thought had the best chance of defeating President Trump. 52% Biden, 31% Sanders. Mark, Joyce?
Chris, I want to ask you guys a quick question. Typically during these campaigns, we see people move from the fringes to the center as we get closer to the general election. But on the Democratic side, we saw two candidates, Sanders and Warren, who were way far left compared to traditional Democratic politics. Do you think that could cause some collateral damage as we get closer to the election? Because you have to reconcile those positions in one person as that person faces Donald Trump.
I don't think it's going to impact the general election at all. I think you have a candidate, Biden, and he's going to say, this is what I'm running on, this is what I stand for, and he is going to succeed or fail on his agenda. When they get to the convention, it's going to be a Biden agenda that comes out of it. So what Bernie or any other, or Warren wanted isn't likely to affect the general voter. It's going to be Biden standing on his own, and I think he's going to do incredibly well.
Winning elections in the general election is about holding on to your base and reaching out to the swing voters in the middle and the independents. Donald Trump kind of threw that upside down 4 years ago, but Joe Biden has the ability to do that. Now, the big question is the Sanders supporters, those that were supporting a revolution that has not materialized to the extent that he needed it to, will they participate in the general election? These are a lot of young voters, and I suspect some, we don't know to what extent, are disillusioned tonight and are disillusioned to see that it's probably not going to happen for Bernie Sanders. It's not going to happen for Bernie Sanders. The math just isn't there after tonight when you look to the states that are still remaining. So we'll see. That's going to be an important thing for Joe Biden to try to do, is to reach out to those, particularly those young voters, maybe some of the rural voters and white collar or blue collar voters that supported Sanders.
And we'll close with this as we send it back to Mark and Joyce. One of the data points already being analyzed tonight in Michigan, in particular, the people who voted against Hillary Clinton that are voting tonight for Joe Biden, and how that factors in going forward with the Democrats. We'll send it back to you for now.
Yeah, we will ask you some more questions toward the end of this hour. I have a lot of questions, too, for both of you gentlemen. But we'll get back to you. Thanks so much for your analysis. So,
yeah, earlier today, Chris Daniels spoke with Trump campaign press secretary Kayleigh McEnerney.
So he asked her about what they're expecting now from these results here in Washington State. Listen.
Well, we'll see what happens. Of course, it's down to Bernie and Biden. So for us, it matters very little who wins this evening. We see Bernie and Biden as both representing government takeover of healthcare, of energy, of the economy, undoing the great Trump economy. So for us, whoever wins, we'll find out tonight. But we know the ideology that's winning, and it's big government takeover.
So how do people in Washington State feel about the president? We have a brand new exclusive King 5 News poll with some new numbers about the president's job approval. 35% of respondents approve of the job he's doing, 58% disapprove. Survey USA conducted the poll last Wednesday and last Thursday. And again, that is a statewide poll of the entire state of Washington.
Our poll also asked people's opinions about the future of the country. 33% believe that America is going in the right direction. That's 33%. 60% think the country is on the wrong track. Well, Washington State Republican Party Chairman Caleb Heimlich is with us now. Thanks so much.
Caleb, President Trump ran unopposed in Washington State's presidential primary. Of course, our King 5 statewide poll found that Democrats, in terms of turnout, are voting 2-1 by a margin over Republicans. Is there a turnout problem, do you think, for Republicans now, or are you concerned about that?
No, not at all. I mean, in this primary, you had 13 Democratic candidates, and only on our side, just President Trump. So Democrat voters in Washington State had every reason to participate. You had Michael Bloomberg spending millions of dollars of ads during Seahawks playoff games, during the Super Bowl. Bernie Sanders had a rally in Tacoma. So they have 13 candidates all driving out their voters. And we saw really unprecedented turnout. President Trump is receiving more votes in this primary than any Republican candidate in the history of Washington state presidential primaries, and he's doing that while he was unopposed. We've seen almost 600,000 people participate. That is a record for participation in a presidential primary. So certainly the base is fired up. They're out there. And now for the next 8 months, our message to voters of Washington state is we can do the same things here in Washington state. We can flip this state. Governor Inslee is vulnerable. I think your polling has shown him at about 40% job approval. And so there's a real opportunity for the voters of this state to choose a new direction.
I want to ask you about the poll that we did asking people's opinions about the future of the country. 60% say they think it's going in the wrong direction, despite the economy, despite the jobs in a pretty good place in this country. Why do you think people, at least in Washington, feel that the country's going in the wrong direction under President Trump?
I think people in Washington state have been doing pretty well historically, and so we've got a lot of people that are pretty well off. And what we've seen is President Trump is really connecting with voters that were struggling, voters that were being left behind. And so,
but what about the 60%? I want you to focus on that. Those people who think it's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah,
Why?
but I think
Why?
those people think that the country is going in the wrong direction. They kind of have the luxury of saying, I disapprove of what President Trump says. I disapprove of the way he says it. But for the people that are struggling, that are living paycheck to paycheck, that's President Trump's base. Those are people that have rallied to him, that are supporting him across the country. And those voters, as I think even your poll showed in Eastern Washington, are with the president. They see someone that's fighting for them, fighting for working people across this country. And so, yes, if you're living in Issaquah and you're doing fine, then you can disapprove of the way President Trump handles himself. But if you're a person that's struggling, living paycheck to paycheck, you really don't care what the president says or tweets. You just want someone who's delivering for your family. And President Trump has done that. We've added 250,000 jobs in Washington state. The average family of four received $3,000 more in their paycheck because of his tax cuts. We got a trade deal with Canada and Mexico. He delivered on criminal justice reform. So we have a candidate in President Trump that has followed through on his campaign promises and did what he said he was going to do.
The president has been running primarily on the success of the economy, and as this coronavirus starts to spread, we're seeing some pretty unprecedented plunges in terms of the economy. Does that change President Trump's strategy as we get closer to the general election?
It certainly, look, I mean, coronavirus is shaking a lot of things up. It's shaking up people's lifestyle choices, if they're working from home, if their kids aren't going to school. So I think that's going to have some ramifications, and we'll kind of see how that applies to politics. But I think we won't know the effects of that fully until a couple weeks and maybe coming months, and we'll see how that plays out.
You struck me by something you just said. You said people don't necessarily care what the president says or does or acts, right? So, but do you think words don't matter? Do you think his words don't matter?
No, I do think they do. I think that absolutely words matter. I just think that for people that are struggling and have been left behind by 8 years of President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden, who were losing their jobs, blue-collar workers here in Washington state, down in Grays Harbor County.
Right.
Grays Harbor County voted for President Trump, first time voting for a Republican since the Great Depression, since 1930. That's because people out there in Aberdeen are struggling. And so they voted for someone, they decided, you know what, he might be a little crass, he might not be the kind of person that I want in my house or over after church, but I'm going to vote for him because I believe that he's going to deliver, and I think he has for those people.
Caleb Heimlich with the Republican Party here in Washington State. It's great to have you on the set.
It's really great.
Great to have your perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All righty, we have much more ahead here on our special election coverage tonight.
As we head to break, another King 5 poll result that you will see only here.
And welcome back. 58 of Washington State's 89 delegates will be awarded based on results from Washington's congressional districts, that is. Taking a look now at District Number 2, candidates need at least 15% to receive any delegates at all. So once they meet that 15% threshold, that's when they can start to get delegates.
All right, let's move down to District 3. This is in Southwest Washington State. On the Republican side, no surprise there, 99% for Donald Trump. And here is that District 3 result right now. Joe Biden leading Bernie Sanders by 4 percentage points right now. But again, this is the first dump of votes.
Congressional District Number 4, let's show you that. And here you see Sanders is leading 32% to Biden's 28%. And as you know, we still have candidates on the ballot who have since dropped out, including Michael Bloomberg with 17%.
More election results from individual congressional districts. This is District 6. As you can see, Joe Biden leading by almost 32% of the vote to Bernie Sanders' 29.5% of the vote. Well, the polls closed in Idaho at 8 o'clock tonight, and here's how Idaho is breaking down. 46% for Joe Biden, 39% for Bernie Sanders.
We will continue to bring you the results, the very latest from the state, also from the nation, coming up next.
Before we head to break, we have an exclusive look at 2 polls. So here's some interesting information. This is what Caleb was talking about. Our King 5 News poll shows Governor Jay Inslee's approval rating now stands at 42%. That's up just 1 point from January. 38% disapprove of the job the governor is doing.
If the general election were held today, who would you vote for in the governor's race? Survey USA's statewide poll shows Inslee has a lead with 43% as he seeks a third term. Tim Eyman is in second with 9%. You may remember that he switched to the Republican Party just last month. 34% are undecided. We'll be right back.
Easy. Taking out a sitting governor is never going to be easy.
Well, it's been just a fascinating night here in Washington and across the country. Let's take a look at another round of our results statewide. And as you can see here, Bernie Sanders leading, ever so slightly, 32.7% to Joe Biden's 32.5% with the returns that are in so far here in Washington state.
So let's check in one last time with our experts, Chris, Scott, and Ron.
So what should we be looking for the rest of the night, gentlemen? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, Joyce, it's going to be interesting to see the breakdown by county and by the districts as we've been laying out over the last hour, just that margin so narrow between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. In our Survey USA King 5 statewide poll, it's interesting in advance of this primary evening, just the breakdown and how Joe Biden was performing so well in the Puget Sound. In eastern Washington, however, Donald Trump was running pretty even in a head-to-head matchup with either candidate. So that's one of the takeaways and one of the things we'll be looking at as we crunch the data. Final thoughts here in this hour, Scott and Ron, about what stands out tonight here in Washington State?
Bernie Sanders is meeting with his campaign team tomorrow. I think you're going to see the end of that campaign, and I think you're going to see people moving over to Biden, and we're going to have one heck of a good campaign this fall.
I was surprised to see Biden leading in 3 of the 4 counties that we put up there on the screen just a short time ago, congressional districts, I should say. And the Survey USA King 5 poll showed exactly what is playing out here, and it looks like Biden could even win this state, and that's another big feather in his cap for the night, because he's had a very big night nationally, and the revolution of Bernie Sanders has come to an end. It's a matter of when he makes that decision.
Well, and one of the things we are looking at tonight is just what that number was going to be for Bernie Sanders. Early voting, it appeared in Washington State, had gone in his direction. Obviously, if it was with the amount of ballots we've seen, hundreds of thousands so heavily in his direction, perhaps that number would have been bigger, but it obviously is not tonight. Just want to point out as well, in our polling of voters heading into this primary, Joe Biden was carrying Washington's self-described moderates by 39 points in a head-to-head matchup with Donald Trump. Washington's independent voters by 21 points. Some of this other data that is interesting now that we see the results in a head-to-head matchup with Donald Trump. 55% of women polled favored Joe Biden, over 27% with Bernie Sanders in a head-to-head matchup. So it looks like women in particular are going to be a story in this election, especially when we crunch the numbers even further.
Suburban women. And we've seen that trend, and it's surprising because many of them are Republicans, and they're going to come out and they're going to support Biden because his record on women's issues is so much stronger than that of the president.
That is a weak spot for Donald Trump heading into the general election is women voters. That's where he struggles the most, and how he tries to get that margin closer than what it starts out as is going to be a big challenge for him, particularly if Joe Biden goes with a woman vice presidential candidate.
Well, and let's talk about that, because Elizabeth Warren, as well, as we have just a few seconds, got about 15% of the vote tonight that's already been tabulated. So we're going to talk more about those issues coming up in the next hour of King 5.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
So that wraps up our special coverage of this special Super Tuesday 2 here in Washington and 5 other states. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's been really great to have you.
Fun hour. Nice job, Joyce. We will have the latest results and also reaction. And as the results continue to come in, next on King 5 News on Kong 6 and 16. And Joyce and I will see you at 10 o'clock and, of course, at 11 o'clock on King 5. Have a great evening until then.
Good night.
Now at 9, sources tell King 5 the governor plans to announce a ban on events of 250 people or more to try and slow the spread of coronavirus.
Democracy in action as the state holds its presidential primary. We will have results and analysis.
And a conspiracy theorist finds himself in trouble with the law in Texas. Ballots have been cast and drop boxes are closed across the state. Good evening. I'm Jessica Janner Castro.
I'm Greg Copeland. Counties are busy right now tallying the votes as the Democratic candidates pursue their party's nomination and President Trump seeks re-election. Here are the numbers so far. And look how close this is tonight. Bernie Sanders narrowly beating Joe Biden right there. You were looking at the numbers correctly, just 2 percentage or 0.2 percentage points, I should say. We still have 2 counties that need a report, so that number could flip by the end of the night and in the coming days as we get more of those ballots in.
Remember, ballots were sent out in our state February 18th, and many voted before Super Tuesday. And if we factor in candidates who have already dropped out, 12% voted for Elizabeth Warren, 11% for Michael Bloomberg.
So the only state voting today with more delegates in Washington was Michigan. NBC is calling Joe Biden the winner there tonight. Here to help us break down some of the numbers, Chief Political Reporter Chris Daniels live in our newsroom. Chris.
Hi, Greg. Yeah, and as you were going through those numbers statewide with Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, I was just looking at the numbers out of King County, where Bernie had a 61% versus a 32-49. So it was narrow in King County, at least with the ballots that dropped tonight in the Washington state primary. On the Democratic side, the Republican side, Donald Trump will go on to claim all of the delegates. And yes, I'm joined once again by our King 5 News political analysts, Ron Sims and Scott McClellan. We've been talking all evening about these numbers and the breakdown of the numbers and what it means in the big picture. What do you think, Ron, in your first take with Washington's numbers and how they break out tonight and what it means big picture?
I think that Washington is, we're perfectly fit. You know, Bernie's not going to be the candidate. He's going to get out. But Biden has a stronghold here as well. And I think it's just a matter of building upon Biden's momentum, which we now know exists in this state. And that's really important in campaigns, because if you don't have momentum, you just, you dry up like a grape. But if you have the momentum and he has it, he'll do very well in this state. He has an infrastructure for it, and it'll work very well for him.
Scott, you've been making the point tonight that Bernie Sanders has not addressed the media, has not made a statement. Joe Biden came out and addressed the media. What do you make of that at this juncture in the race?
I think it's very telling that Sanders' campaign said that he was not going to come out and speak tonight. That just doesn't happen unless you are stepping back and taking a look at where do we go from here. And then when you look at the math says there's not a path forward for you. I mean, Bernie Sanders would probably have to get well over 60% of the remaining delegates to try to overtake Joe Biden. And he has made very clear that whoever is leading in the delegate count going into the convention, he will support that candidate. And the math says there's not a chance for Sanders to really catch Joe Biden at this point. All the states next week, a lot of delegates, Florida, Ohio, Illinois, and other states, and then Georgia the week after that. Those are all strong states for Joe Biden, particularly when you look at what he's done in Michigan and Minnesota. Ohio is going to bode well for him. Florida, he is way up. That's a lot of delegates that are going to continue to expand this margin. So I think Bernie Sanders is taking a look at where he goes next, and it's probably not on with his campaign.
And we've been talking about Michigan a lot tonight because this was a state that Bernie Sanders had a surprise in 4 years ago, upsetting Hillary Clinton after the polling had said that Clinton was going to run away with that race. And you see what has happened tonight, a 15-point spread. That was the big prize, bigger than Washington State tonight. We've been analyzing Michigan as well. Ron, you know that state and the breakdown of that state demographically. What do you take away from that?
Michigan is a good barometer for national politics in terms of its demographics, its industries, where it's located, its politics. And I think to see that Biden did incredibly well there, Bernie did not. Bernie took that as, I think, a message, which is why they're having the meeting. In those meetings, I know what they're like. You say, should we continue? Biden's going to go on and continue to be fairly potent. He's going to have a good campaign organization. But Michigan was the place that we all said for a long time would make or break one of those candidates. And we saw one broken tonight.
And we're going to leave it there for now and have more for you coming up later on in the hour.
Okay. Chris, gentlemen, thank you.
So far, Democrats have shown a higher voter turnout compared to Republicans in this primary election. The chairman of Washington's Republican Party says that doesn't show a lack of support for incumbent President Donald Trump. He joined us earlier tonight to talk about the primary election results.
Not at all. I mean, in this primary, you had 13 Democratic candidates and only on our side, just President Trump. So Democrat voters in Washington state had every reason to participate. You had Michael Bloomberg spending millions of dollars of ads during Seahawks playoff games during the Super Bowl. Bernie Sanders had a rally in Tacoma. So they have 13 candidates all driving out their voters. And we saw really unprecedented turnout. President Trump is receiving more votes in this primary than any Republican candidate in the history of Washington state presidential primaries, and he's doing that while he was unopposed. We've seen almost 600,000 people participate. That is a record for participation.
And of course, as we mentioned at the top of this hour, Senator Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden have a very slim margin between them right now, a fraction of a percentage point. The chair of Washington's Democratic Party says while supporters are split, they have the same end goal.
I think what it means is people are divided on who they want to have carry out the ideals of the Democratic Party. We have terrific candidates. I think we all want to get to the same destination of unity and things like health care for everyone, income inequality, fixing our justice system. We might have some differences on how we get there, but the destination is the same, and Democrats will be there in November.
And of course, there's been a lot of activity at the King County election headquarters amid record turnout.
King 5's Natalie Swaby joins us live from Renton tonight with more. Natalie?
Yeah, here, 40% turnout as of today, and there's still ballots to be counted. So that is record-breaking for a presidential primary for King County. They say the previous record was 34%. Now, the doors here closed at 8 o'clock tonight, but we have video from earlier that shows the people who came here to register and vote, as well as drop off ballots today. In another part of the building where they were processing ballots, workers were required to wear gloves because of coronavirus concerns. Now, the ballots are being carefully checked. One thing workers are looking for, voters must mark Democrat or Republican on their ballot. And so far, about 24,000 people have failed to do that or sign their ballot. And King County Elections will be contacting those people. They have until March 19th to get that party preference issue resolved and still count the ballot. If that doesn't happen, then the ballot is considered invalid. Tonight, a few voters talked with us about their decision.
I decided to vote for Bernie. Student loans are a big issue, and so I'm hoping to get some change seen with that. And I don't know, we'll see.
I just think that we can probably get a little bit of back to normal with Joe Biden compared to things the way they are now.
Joe Biden, I think he's going to win. And I was a Kamala Harris guy, but she just didn't get any traction. So Joe was probably my second or third pick from the beginning. But yeah, I'm okay with Joe.
King County election says about half the ballots tallied today. A majority should be counted by Friday, and they plan to have the election certified by March 20th. Live in Renton, Natalie Swaby, King 5 News.
Okay, Natalie, thank you. Bernie Sanders won this state's Democratic caucuses 4 years ago, but this year ballots cast in the primary election determine who gets the delegates.
And King 5's Sebastian Robertson live for us, where Sanders supporters are watching the election results tonight. Hi, Sebastian. Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, as you mentioned, Sanders has a good history in Washington state and in the Northwest. He can frankly draw a crowd of supporters, even if he's not here. But that's not the case this go round because of precautions being taken over the coronavirus. That being said, there's still a small unofficial viewing party, although there are some official figures here. I want to bring in Sean Scott, who heads up the local campaign here in Washington state. As you see these numbers come in, what are your feelings about your candidate's chances?
Right. Well, as the field director, for the state and for Bernie's campaign here in Washington, we always knew that this race was going to be very competitive. Right now, what we're seeing is the fact that, we were out competing for votes with students, with a lot of renters, people who tend to vote very late because they're not used to seeing candidates stick up for their real material interests in this city and in this state and in this county. So it's going to be a very, very close election, but we also feel like, following some results that we saw, for example, in municipal elections, which were also vote by mail here in Seattle, that we might pull ahead on late ballots. And so that's been our messaging all along.
Seattle has been the center of this fight to contain the coronavirus outbreak, the greater Seattle area. How does that impacted your plans leading up to election day?
Right. Well, we wanted to make sure that we had some sort of gathering, albeit an informal gathering, with all of our supporters, our volunteers, people who have put in so much effort. We've hit over 517,000 phone calls in Washington in the last week alone, knocked on over 40,000 doors across the state. But at the same time that that's happening, we know that there are a lot of people that have real concerns about coronavirus. So we didn't want to hold our celebration gathering tonight here at a place where we knew that it was going to be bringing hundreds and hundreds of people like we knew we would probably turn out, and instead decided to have a little bit more of a modest gathering to celebrate what's happened.
Sean Scott with the Sanders campaign. Thank you, sir. I know you'll be watching closely as we head through the rest of the evening.
Absolutely.
All right, still very close to call. That's the latest from the Sanders Watch Party here on Capitol Hill. Back to you.
All right, Sebastian, thank you. Okay, so how is the Trump campaign viewing Washington tonight? Well, we talked with the National Press Secretary for the campaign. Kayleigh McEnany told King 5 it doesn't really matter if Sanders or Biden wins Washington tonight because the president views them as having a similar ideology of big government takeover. And she says it will be interesting to see the turnout for the president here.
Well, President Trump, yes, of course, is the foregone victor in these primaries and caucuses, but it is interesting to see weeks when he breaks records in vote totals or turnouts in states that we're not even making a play for at the moment.
As of yesterday, 62% of returned ballots in Washington were on the Democratic side, according to the Secretary of State's office.
Tomorrow, we are expecting a big announcement from Governor Jay Inslee regarding the state's plan to contain the coronavirus. We have confirmed details on what that announcement will be coming up.
Also ahead, what's it like to contract coronavirus? Next, we're going to hear from someone who went through it.
Now we will have a few light scattered showers out there this evening, and then we get a bit of a break before a cold blast comes right back at us.